On July 19, 2026, at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey, something will happen that has never happened before in the entire 96-year history of the FIFA World Cup. For the very first time, the most-watched sporting event on the planet will have a halftime show. And standing on that stage, in front of a global live audience of over 5 billion people, will be BTS. Not a solo act, not a rock band trying to recapture its legacy, not a regional artist given a symbolic gesture. BTS, 7 Korean men who started in a small agency that nobody believed in, who trained in cramped rooms with no air conditioning, who were told their faces were wrong for this industry, their accents too strong, their music too different, standing at the center of the biggest stage in the history of human entertainment. And the moment you let that sink in, really sink in, you start asking the only question that matters. Why BTS? Out of every artist on Earth, out of every icon that FIFA could have called, why do they choose a K-pop group? And more specifically, when you look at what BTS has become in 2026, when you trace the invisible thread connecting this announcement to the year they've been having, one name keeps appearing at the center of every conversation. One member who has quietly, relentlessly, and undeniably become the face of this era. ParkJimin. Let's start with the scale of what just happened, because I think a lot of people are still processing it. This is not a Super Bowl halftime show. I want to be very clear about that, because people keep making that comparison, and the comparison actually undersells what this is. The Super Bowl draws roughly 115 million viewers in the United States. The FIFA World Cup final draws between 3 and 5 billion viewers globally. That's not a typo. 3 to 5 billion. The 2022 World Cup final between Argentina and France was watched by an estimated 1.5 billion people just for the live broadcast, and cumulative viewership across the tournament reached 5 billion. When you add streaming, delayed broadcast, and global distribution, the final is simply in a category by itself. There is no other event on the planet that comes close. Not the Olympics, not the Oscars, not anything. This is, by every measurable metric, the most watched single moment in human history, and it will repeat that distinction on July 19th. FIFA knew this. That's why they waited 96 years to do this. They waited until they had artists who could match the weight of the occasion. They waited until they had something worth announcing. And when they finally pulled the trigger on the first ever World Cup final halftime show, they chose BTS to co-headline it alongside Madonna and Shakira, 2 women who have individually headlined Super Bowl halftime shows and whose names are synonymous with global pop history. The fact that BTS was placed in the same breath as those 2 names is not an accident. It's a statement. Now, the question of why FIFA chose BTS specifically is worth unpacking carefully, because it's not just about album sales or streaming numbers, though those are extraordinary. BTS came back from their military hiatus in early 2026 with Arirang, their 6th studio album, released on March 20th, and it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Not just debuted at number 1, it stayed there for 3 consecutive weeks, which was their first multi-week number 1 on that chart. The Arirang World Tour launched in Goyang, South Korea, to sold-out stadiums and immediately became one of the fastest-selling concert tours of the decade. By the time they brought the tour to the United States on April 25th, the cultural conversation around BTS had reached a kind of critical mass that the music industry hadn't seen since their pre-hiatus peak. But here's the thing about FIFA's choice that goes deeper than chart performance. FIFA, and particularly the Global Citizen Partnership that is producing the show, was looking for something very specific. Chris Martin, who is curating the halftime experience, talked about it in the announcement video. This idea that the show is about we rather than me. It's about togetherness. It's about music as a universal language. And when you think about what BTS represents symbolically, not just musically, they are arguably the most powerful embodiment of that idea in the modern era. BTS built their fan base, the army, across language barriers, cultural divides, and geopolitical distances in a way that no Western act has managed to replicate in the social media age. Their fandom isn't concentrated in one country or one demographic. It spans Indonesia, Brazil, the Philippines, the United States, India, France, Nigeria. It spans ages from teenagers to people in their 40s. It spans backgrounds, religions, and identities. When FIFA wanted a halftime show that would feel genuinely global, not just American global, not just European global, but planet global, BTS was the only group on Earth that made complete sense for that brief. There is no other act in the world right now whose fan base is as geographically distributed, as actively engaged, and as emotionally invested as the ARMY. And then BTS released their statement in response to the announcement, and even that was perfectly chosen. They said, "It is a tremendous honor to stand on such a meaningful stage shared by the entire world. We believe music is a universal language that delivers hope and unity." That statement wasn't written by a PR team trying to sound good. That statement is a direct echo of everything BTS has stood for since 2013. The fact that it aligns perfectly with Global Citizen's mission, expanding access to education and football for children worldwide, is not a coincidence. BTS has been doing philanthropy and advocacy work for years through their Love Myself campaign and their partnership with UNICEF. This is a group that has always understood that their platform comes with responsibility. So the why is clear. FIFA chose BTS because BTS is the only act in the world that is simultaneously a global pop phenomenon, a cultural symbol of cross-border unity, an active force for social good, and an artist collective at the absolute peak of their commercial power. But now let's talk about something that the initial headlines have mostly glossed over. Let's talk about Jimin. When BTS walks onto that MetLife Stadium stage on July 19th, every member will be there. This is an OT7 moment, and that matters enormously. But within that group, within the story of BTS in 2026 specifically, there is a member who has become something beyond what even the most devoted ARMY member might have predicted 2 years ago. ParkJimin has spent this entire comeback era becoming the gravitational center of everything BTS touches in the public eye. Go back to the Arirang rollout. Who is it that did the deep dive studio notes on Weverse, walking fans through the emotional architecture of each track with a level of transparency and vulnerability that became the most shared BTS content of the entire pre-release period? Jimin, who sat down with Zane Lowe on Apple Music for a conversation that journalists were quoting for weeks afterward about what it felt like to come back from military service and find that the music still meant everything. Jimin. When BTS appeared on The Tonight Show ahead of the Arirang release, it was Jimin's individual performance clip that broke streaming records on the platform within 24 hours. And then came Tokyo Dome. If you were not watching the Arirang World Tour when BTS hit Tokyo Dome on April 17th and 18th, let me tell you what happened. Because the concert film footage and the fan accounts and the mainstream press coverage all point to the same conclusion. Jimin performed on that stage like a man who had been waiting his entire life for exactly this moment. The restraint he showed in the quieter emotional sections, the explosive precision in the choreography sequences, the way he commanded silence from a 55,000-person crowd, simply by standing still, it was the kind of performance that changes how people talk about someone. After Tokyo Dome, it wasn't just ARMY saying Jimin was in a different league. Music journalists who hadn't given K-pop serious attention in years were writing about what they witnessed. The word that kept appearing was presence. Not technique, not talent. Presence. Presence is a thing that cannot be taught and cannot be manufactured. You either have it or you don't. And what Tokyo Dome confirmed is that Jimin has it in a quantity that is genuinely rare, even among the most successful performers on the planet. It's the quality that makes 5 billion people stop scrolling for 11 minutes. It's the quality that makes a stadium feel like a room. It's the quality that Madonna built her career on, that Shakira has never lost, and that Jimin, at 30 years old, has fully arrived into. Think about the composition of this halftime show lineup for a moment. Madonna, the greatest female pop performer of the modern era, someone who has spent 4 decades defying expectations of what a woman in music is allowed to be, known globally for fearless reinvention and stage mastery. Shakira, a woman who performed at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa with Waka Waka and literally became synonymous with that tournament, who co-headlined the 2020 Super Bowl and showed the world what it looks like when an artist leaves everything on the stage. And BTS, 7 Korean men who broke every rule that Western music executives told them they were supposed to follow and won anyway. Within that BTS unit, Jimin occupies a specific role that becomes especially resonant in the context of this event. He is the emotional interpreter. When BTS performs as a group, Jimin is a member whose job, whose gift, is to make you feel what the song is actually about. Not explain it. Feel it. He does this with his body, with his voice, with the extraordinary expressiveness of his face when he performs. He is the member who can make 55,000 people cry during a choreographed number and then make them scream with joy in the same song. That duality, that emotional range, is what makes him magnetic on a stage at the scale of the World Cup final. There's also a biographical dimension to this that is impossible to ignore. Jimin is from Busan. He grew up watching South Korea co-host the World Cup in 2002, one of the greatest footballing surprises in tournament history, the run that made an entire nation believe in miracles. He was 8 years old. He has talked in interviews about the feeling of watching his country on that global stage, about what it meant to see Korea represented at the center of the world's attention. On July 19th, Jimin will be at that center himself. And he will be there not as a representative of Korea alone, but as a representative of what Korean artistry can bring to the world. The circle that closes on that night is not just musical. It's personal. It's the story of a kid from Busan who loved to dance and who refused, every single time the industry tried to diminish him, to be anything less than exactly what he was. The industry tried to diminish him repeatedly. People forget this about Jimin because of where he stands now, but the narrative around him during the early BTS years was often brutal. Critics questioned whether his voice was strong enough for the kind of material BTS was producing. Choreographers who worked with idol groups in that era consistently noted that his standards for his own performance were unusual, almost extreme. He would continue practicing a section long after everyone else had stopped, not because he was told to, but because he believed it wasn't right yet. He trained his body to a level of precision that became visible in performances, and that translated directly into the wordless communication that is the hallmark of elite stage presence. What Jimin proved over the years leading to Ararang is that the doubt was always the wrong framework. The question was never whether he was enough. The question was always whether the stages he was being given were big enough to contain what he was capable of. Tokyo Dome answered that question. The World Cup final is the final answer. And here is what I think the 5 billion people watching on July 19th are going to see. Even if they have never listened to a BTS song in their lives, even if they are watching purely for the football and have no context for what K-pop is or why it matters, they are going to see a performer who makes them feel something. They are going to see someone on that stage who is not performing for the cameras, not performing for the headlines, not performing to prove anything to anyone. They are going to see someone who performs because music is the truest language they know, and because the stage is where they are most fully themselves. That is what Jimin brings to the biggest moment in the history of live music. Not a calculated star image, not a brand collaboration. Himself. Fully, completely, irreducibly himself. FIFA chose BTS because BTS is the only group that could stand on that stage and represent the genuine globalism that the World Cup aspires to. They chose artists who have lived the values that this event is supposed to celebrate. Unity, hope, the idea that where you come from doesn't determine the ceiling of where you can go. BTS has been that proof for over a decade. Consider what it actually means for a Korean artist to be standing on this stage at this specific moment in history. The conversation about Korean cultural exports, about what the world calls the Korean wave, has been building for 20 years, but it has always lived in a kind of cultural parenthesis. It was celebrated within its own communities, acknowledged by certain music critics, studied by academics, but it was rarely treated as central. BTS, more than any other act, cracked that parenthesis open. They didn't wait for Western gatekeepers to invite them in. They built such an enormous, loyal, and globally distributed fanbase that the gatekeepers eventually had no choice but to acknowledge what was already happening. And now the most powerful sports organization on earth is not inviting them as a novelty or a gesture. They are inviting them as co-equals alongside the two most iconic female performers of the last 40 years. That is not a symbolic moment. That is a structural shift. And Jimin understands this weight better than anyone. There is something specific about the way he carries the responsibility of representation, not just for BTS, not just for K-pop, but for every person who was ever told that their identity placed a ceiling on their ambitions. He has spoken, in the quiet and careful way he tends to speak about things that matter most to him, about the kids in Korea who are watching BTS, and deciding whether to believe that their dreams are possible. He knows that what happens on that MetLife stage in July is not just about one night, one performance, one halftime show. It's about what gets proven to be possible. It's about what the world's 5 billion witnesses go home believing about who gets to stand at the center of human achievement. That is the dimension of this that no headline has fully captured yet. The score of the match will be forgotten. The statistics of the tournament will be archived. But the image of ParkJimin on that stage, alongside 2 legends, in front of the largest live audience in history, performing music that started in a practice room in Seoul, that image will not fade. It will become part of the permanent record of what this era was. And within BTS, Jimin is the reason the world already knows this. He is the reason the conversations keep circling back to what BTS means in 2026, specifically what this comeback means, what this tour means. He is the thread that connects the music to the emotion, the performance to the feeling, the group to the individual stories of the people watching. On July 19th, 11 minutes will separate the first half from the second half of the most watched football match in history. For those 11 minutes, the world will be watching. And if you understand anything about what has happened in BTS's story over the last year, if you've been paying attention to what Jimin has been building toward across his entire career, you will know that those 11 minutes were always going to lead here. The stage has finally caught up to him.